I was exhausted carrying the family in my husband's place. The November rain hadn't stopped all day. It poured in long, cold streaks against the bus window as I leaned my head back, trying to keep my eyes open. My body ached. My shoulders, my hands, even the tips of my fingers, everything hurt. The grocery bags beside me were heavy, my coat was damp, and my heart felt heavier than both. When the bus finally reached my stop, I stepped out into the rain, clutching the bags close. Scranton's streets were slick and quiet. The streetlights cast tired halos on the pavement. I pulled my hood tighter and started walking home. Our small house stood at the end of Birch Street. The windows glowed warmly, but inside, I knew it wasn't warmth waiting for me, it was exhaustion in another form. As soon as I opened the door, I heard the TV. The same low drone of late-night sports commentary echoed through the living room. David was on the couch, one leg stretched over the other, a beer in hand. He didn't look up right away. "Hey," he muttered without glancing away from the screen. "You're late." "I had to stay and close the books," I replied, setting the groceries down by the counter. "Quarter-end reports." He finally turned, his brow furrowed. "You really should talk to your boss about that. They take advantage of you." I bit back the urge to laugh. "Take advantage of me?" The irony stung. "I'll keep that in mind," I said quietly. The kitchen smelled faintly of something burnt. A single dirty pan sat in the sink, half filled with cold grease. David had made lunch, which usually meant he'd reheated leftovers and left a mess. From upstairs, I heard Emma and Lucas arguing, something about Wi-Fi and homework. I sighed, hanging my coat by the door. "Kids, dinner in 30 minutes. No response. Just the muffled thud of footsteps and another door slamming. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, unpacking the groceries, chopping vegetables, boiling pasta, stirring sauce. It was a rhythm I knew too well, a kind of muscle memory born of necessity. Meanwhile, David's voice floated in from the living room. "They called me for another interview today," he said, as if that were news worth celebrating. "But it's a management role. I don't know if it's the right fit." "That's good," I said. "You should go." "Yeah, but it's in some construction company. I don't want to work in some warehouse with guys who barely finished high school." "It's not me." The knife froze in my hand. I took a slow breath. "It's work, David. We need the income." He didn't answer. The game announcer's voice rose instead, filling the silence. I stared at the pot of boiling water, the bubbles bursting like the anger rising in my chest. I swallowed it down, the way I always did. There wasn't time to fight, not when there were bills to pay, dinner to make, and kids to keep afloat. By the time dinner was ready, the table looked decent, 3 plates of spaghetti, a tossed salad, and a glass of water for each of us. I called the kids again, louder this time. Lucas came down first, earbuds still in. Emma followed, frowning at her phone. "Did Dad even help?" she asked quietly, sitting down. I glanced at David, who didn't look up from his screen. "Your father's tired," I said, though the words tasted bitter. The 4 of us sat in silence for a while. Forks scraped plates. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled softly. "So," David said suddenly, "maybe you can cut down your hours next month." "I'll find something soon." I looked at him, my fork pausing midair. "You've been saying that for almost 2 years. His jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said quietly, "I'm tired, David. I can't keep doing this alone." The air shifted, sharp, brittle. Emma and Lucas exchanged glances. I forced a smile and pushed my plate away. "Never mind. Let's just finish dinner." Afterward, I washed the dishes while David went back to the couch. The TV flickered again, the same dull light dancing across his face. The kids retreated upstairs. The house grew silent except for the sound of rain and running water. At some point, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, hair messy, eyes tired, shoulders slumped. I looked like someone twice my age. Someone who had forgotten what it meant to rest. I thought of how things used to be, how David used to wake up early, make coffee, kiss my forehead before heading to work. How we used to laugh about small things. Fight over silly ones, make up before bed. Now, he barely noticed when I walked into a room. As I wiped the counter clean, my mind wandered back to the bills on the fridge, mortgage, electricity, insurance, the kids' tuition. All of them paid with my salary. My promotions. My late nights. David hadn't contributed $1 in over a year. Yet he still complained when I worked overtime. When I turned off the kitchen light, I heard him mumble from the living room, "You work too much, Tana. You never have time for anyone anymore." I froze in the doorway. "Someone has to keep this house running," I said. He looked at me then, really looked, but only for a moment. His eyes were dull, like he couldn't see past his own pride. "I'm trying," he muttered. I nodded. "So am I." That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain. David snored softly beside me, unbothered, unaware. For the first time in a long time, I let myself admit it, I wasn't just tired. I was empty, drained from carrying a family that no longer carried me back, and as the rain beat harder against the window, one thought kept echoing in my mind: if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone even notice? Before everything started falling apart, David wasn't like this. There was a time, God, it feels like a lifetime ago, when he was the kind of man people looked up to. He was ambitious, sharp, full of ideas. The kind of man who lit up a room just by walking into it. I met him 15 years ago at a small accounting seminar in Harrisburg. He was the guest speaker, I was just an attendee sitting in the third row. Scribbling notes like a nerd. After the session, he came up to me and said, "You asked the smartest question of the night." I remember blushing so hard I could barely answer. He laughed, offered to buy me coffee, and somehow, one coffee turned into three. Back then, we used to talk for hours about everything: books, travel, what kind of parents we wanted to be one day. He used to say, "You and I, Tana, will build something that lasts." And we did. For a while, when we got married, we didn't have much, but we had each other. We lived in a tiny two-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of paint and old wood. David had just gotten a promotion at the logistics company he worked for, and I had landed a stable accounting job. We didn't have luxury, but we had laughter. He would wake up early every morning, make pancakes for me, and kiss me on the cheek before leaving for work. I used to think, this is what partnership looks like. Then came the layoffs. The company he'd given 10 years to downsized half its staff, and David was among them. I still remember the night he came home with that small brown box, his entire career packed into one cardboard memory. "I'll find something soon," he said, his smile strained but confident. You know me, I always land on my feet. I believed him. Of course, I did. He was my husband, my best friend, but weeks turned into months. Resumes were sent. Interviews came and went. Every rejection chipped away at him, first his confidence, then his patience, and finally, his pride. He started saying things like, "They don't appreciate experience anymore," or, "They only want kids who'll work for peanuts." I'd try to encourage him. Maybe just take something for now, something temporary, until the right thing comes along. He'd glare at me, offended. "You think I'm going to stock shelves at a grocery store? I'm not desperate." That's when I stopped offering advice. Because every conversation became a landmine. He began sleeping in later. The mornings that once smelled like pancakes and coffee turned into silence and stale air. I'd leave for work while he was still in bed, pretending to scroll through job listings. At first, I thought it was just a rough patch. That he just needed time to bounce back. But then the bills started stacking up: electricity, mortgage, the kids' school fees. Someone had to keep the lights on. So I worked longer hours, picked up extra shifts, and told myself it was temporary. Temporary stretched into years. Emma, our daughter, once asked me at dinner, "Why doesn't Dad go to work like you do?" David had heard her, and his face turned dark. He slammed his fork down and said, "I'm trying, Emma. You wouldn't understand." She didn't ask again after that. She just stopped talking to him altogether. Lucas followed suit, polite, distant, a little cold. He was 15 and angry at everything, but mostly, I think he was angry at his father for being absent even when he was right there. The house grew quieter every month. We no longer had movie nights or family dinners filled with laughter. Just tired eyes, forced small talk, and the constant background noise of the TV filling the silence. Sometimes I'd look at David and wonder if he even saw us anymore, or if he was too busy seeing what he'd lost. One night, I came home to find him sitting in the dark, beer can in hand, staring at nothing. The TV was off. The kids were asleep. He didn't even turn when I entered. "David?" I asked softly. He sighed. "You don't get it, Tana. I used to matter. I used to be someone." My heart twisted. "You still matter. You just need to start somewhere again." He shook his head. "You wouldn't understand. You've got your job, your little routines. You still have purpose." It wasn't meant as an insult, but it cut deep anyway. Because my purpose was survival. Working, cleaning, paying bills, raising kids, keeping us afloat. The next morning, I watched him leave for an interview. I wanted to believe him. But when I drove past the cafe later that afternoon, I saw him sitting there, alone, staring at his phone. Not a folder or resume in sight. That's when I stopped asking about job applications. Stopped asking anything. Because every question only deepened the cracks between us. Over time, my love for him didn't vanish, it just quieted. Like a candle running out of air. He still slept beside me, but it felt like there was an ocean between us. I remember once, when Lucas came home upset about a bad grade, David snapped, "You're just like your mother, always trying too hard." Lucas stormed off, and I stood there frozen. Not because he'd compared us, but because I realized David no longer respected the very things that held this family together. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I thought about how love sometimes doesn't end in explosions or betrayal, it just fades. Slowly, until all that's left is habit, and in that silence, I realized something painful. David wasn't the only one who'd lost his way. I had too. I'd been so busy holding everything up that I forgot what it felt like to live. And deep down, I knew something had to change, because if I didn't stop carrying all the weight, I'd eventually break under it. The November rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight. The streets of Scranton were slick with mud and streetlight reflections. And the bus windows were fogged over with the warmth of tired commuters. It was almost 7:30 p.m. when I sank into the cracked vinyl seat near the back. My hands ached from carrying 2 grocery bags, my coat was damp, and my mind was running on autopilot: dinner, laundry, tomorrow's meeting, bills. Always bills. Outside, people hurried past puddles with umbrellas. Inside, the bus hummed with silence. Except for the occasional cough and the faint buzz of an old fluorescent light overhead. That's when I heard it. A man sitting 2 rows behind me, maybe in his 40s, talking quietly on the phone. His voice was calm, tender. "Hey, hon. Yeah, I'm just on my way home." A pause. A chuckle. "No, don't wait up too long, okay? I know you've had a long day." Another pause. His voice softened. "Thank you for dinner, by the way. You didn't have to, but I appreciate it. I really do." Something about those words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't that he said anything extraordinary. It was the tone, gentle, grounded, full of gratitude. Like he actually saw his wife. He kept talking, low and steady, the kind of conversation that fills silence without effort. "I'm lucky, you know," he said after a moment. "Lucky to have you. You make things easier." And there it was, the sentence that cracked something open inside me. Lucky to have you. I stared out the fogged window. My reflection barely visible in the glass, hair frizzed from the rain. Dark circles under my eyes, my face slack with exhaustion. I tried to remember the last time David had said anything remotely like that to me. I couldn't. The closest thing he'd said in the past year was, "We're out of detergent again." The man behind me laughed softly, said goodbye, and hung up. The sound of the call ending felt like a door closing, and I sat there, blinking at my reflection, realizing just how long it had been since I'd felt seen. It was strange, how something so small, so mundane, could feel like a slap and a revelation all at once. For 2 years, I'd been moving through life like a ghost. Cooking, cleaning, earning, fixing. Existing, but not living. If I vanished tomorrow, the house would crumble only because no one would know how to function without me. But would anyone miss me? Or just the things I did? As the bus rolled through downtown, I thought of Lena, my best friend since college. She'd said something to me a few months ago that I brushed off at the time: "As long as you're carrying the weight, he'll let you." I'd laughed bitterly back then, told her she didn't understand. But now, sitting in that flickering bus light, I realized she'd been right. David wasn't malicious. He wasn't cruel. He was just complacent. And I'd made it easy for him to be that way. The bus stopped at the corner of Maple and Fifth. The door hissed open, and cold air swept in. I tightened my grip on the grocery bags, staring blankly as people filed out. I should have stood up. My stop was next. But I didn't move. Instead, I sat there, frozen, as the realization sank in deeper. I had built a life that depended entirely on my exhaustion. The bus jolted forward again, and my eyes stung unexpectedly. Not because I was sad, but because I was angry at David for giving up. Angry at myself for enabling it. Angry that my worth had become measured in laundry loads and overtime hours. When the bus finally reached my stop, I stepped off into the rain. The wind slapped cold against my face, but it felt cleansing. I walked home slower than usual. The streetlights blurred through the drizzle, painting the pavement golden gray. For once, I didn't rush, didn't rehearse dinner prep in my head or worry about bills. When I reached our front door, I stood under the porch light for a long time, staring at the chipped paint and the sagging welcome mat. The house looked the same as always, quiet, still, hollow. But something inside me had shifted. I unlocked the door. The smell of burnt toast greeted me. David had probably tried to cook again. The TV was blaring, and Emma's voice echoed faintly from upstairs: "Mom, we're out of cereal." I wanted to laugh, but it came out more like a sigh. Same chaos. Same cycle, but not the same me. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and stared at the rain streaking the window. I thought about the man on the bus, how casually he'd said thank you, how easily he'd expressed gratitude, and I thought about David, about the version of him who used to write me love notes. Leave sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Drive safe," or "You're amazing." That man hadn't vanished overnight. He'd just stopped trying. Maybe I had too. I reached for a pen and a scrap of paper, scribbling down a few words before I lost the nerve. What happens if I stop carrying everything? The question sat there under the kitchen light, black ink bleeding into the paper fibers. I didn't have an answer. But for the first time in years, I wanted one. The rain outside eased into a drizzle. Somewhere upstairs, David shifted in bed, mumbling in his sleep. I stared at the note again, my fingers tracing the words. And quietly, I made a decision, small, private, but certain. Tomorrow, I'd stop talking about change. I'd start being the change, even if it scared him. Even if it scared me, because I'd spent too long living like a shadow in my own house. And I was done being invisible. When I woke up that Saturday morning, the rain had already started again, a soft drizzle tapping against the window like it was trying to whisper something I couldn't quite hear. David was still asleep. One arm flung across the bed, snoring faintly. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, probably another notification from a job site he wouldn't apply to. For a long moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with the same familiar weight. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something quieter, exhaustion so deep it almost felt calm. I slipped out of bed, dressed in jeans and a sweater, and padded down to the kitchen. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. On the counter sat the grocery list I'd written the night before. I looked at it: bread, milk, detergent, cat food, then folded it in half and shoved it into a drawer. For once, none of it felt urgent. Instead, I pulled out a piece of paper and wrote 5 simple words: I have things to do. Then I hesitated, the pen hovering. After a moment, I added, I'll be back tonight. No explanations. No apologies. I left the note by the coffee maker, where I knew David would find it, and grabbed my coat. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and pine. For the first time in months, I wasn't rushing anywhere. My phone buzzed with reminders: laundry pickup, grocery delivery, work emails, but I turned it off and slipped it into my bag. The world suddenly felt enormous and quiet. Like I was walking through it for the first time in years. I stopped by a small cafe downtown. One I'd passed 100 times but never entered. It smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans. I ordered pancakes and coffee, sat by the window, and just breathed. Nobody asked me for anything. Nobody called my name. Nobody needed me. The silence wasn't empty. It was liberating. For a while, I just watched the rain fall on the street outside. The way it blurred car headlights and made strangers huddle closer under umbrellas. I thought about how many years I'd spent trying to hold everything together: marriage, family, appearances, like a juggler afraid to drop even one ball. But no one had ever asked if I wanted to keep juggling. After breakfast, I wandered into a bookstore next door. It was quiet and smelled faintly of dust and paper. The man at the counter smiled politely. I smiled back. I walked through the aisles without a purpose, running my fingers over the spines of books, feeling the rough texture of freedom. Eventually, I found a small park near the river. The trees were shedding their last leaves, and the water glimmered gray under the overcast sky. I sat on a bench, letting my hair get damp from the mist, and for once, I didn't care. I was still there when I heard a familiar voice, deep, steady, full of warmth. Didn't expect to see you here on a Saturday. It was my dad. He lived a few blocks away and walked this path every morning. His silver hair was tucked under a beanie, his coat zipped up to his chin. Hey, Dad, I said softly. He sat beside me, his steps slow, his breath visible in the cold air. You look tired, he said. The kind of tired sleep doesn't fix. I laughed quietly. You could say that. He didn't press. He never did. After a moment, he said, your mom once disappeared for a day too, you know. I turned to him, surprised. She did? He nodded, eyes distant. Years ago. Before you were born. I'd lost my job, got stuck in a rut. She was doing everything, working, cooking, paying bills. One morning she just left a note that said, I need to breathe. He smiled faintly. Scared me half to death. I spent the whole day panicking, realizing how much I'd taken her for granted. When she came back, I listened. Really listened. His voice softened. Sometimes people like me need silence to understand the noise we've caused. I stared at the river, letting his words sink in. Maybe that's what today was, my silence. Not punishment. Just truth. I don't want to punish David, I murmured. I just don't want to disappear inside my own life anymore. Dad reached over, patting my hand gently. Then don't. The right people will find a way to meet you halfway. The wrong ones will stay behind. We sat there in silence for a long while, the rain, the river, the faint sound of geese overhead. By late afternoon, the clouds began to break apart, letting streaks of pale sunlight spill through. I felt lighter than I had in months. When I finally stood, Dad said quietly, whatever happens when you go back, don't apologize for choosing yourself. I nodded, hugged him tightly, and started walking home. The streets glistened in the fading light. Children splashed in puddles, laughter echoing through the cool air. I passed by the cafe again, the smell of cinnamon still lingering, and smiled. When I reached my neighborhood, I saw the familiar outline of our house. The windows were dark except for one faint glow in the kitchen. I hesitated at the gate, realizing how strange it felt to return, as if I'd been gone for more than just a day. Maybe, in some way, I had. I unlocked the door slowly. The smell of burnt food hit me immediately, followed by the sight of dishes piled high in the sink. A pot overflowed on the stove. Somewhere upstairs, I heard the kids arguing. For a second, guilt pricked at me, sharp and instinctive. But it passed, because beneath the chaos, I sensed something else: awareness. For the first time, they'd had to face what life looked like without me holding every string. I walked to the table, picked up the soggy note I'd left that morning. The ink had bled slightly from a spilled drink, but the words were still visible: I have things to do. I'll be back tonight. I smiled faintly. I wasn't running away. I was finally coming back, to myself. The day started out deceptively calm. The kind of Saturday that should have been easy: no alarms, no deadlines, no packed lunches to make, except Tana was gone. Her note sat on the kitchen counter, the one spot she always left the grocery lists. David found it just after 9. At first, he didn't think much of it. She was probably out running errands, right? The words were simple enough: I have things to do. I'll be back tonight. But as the morning stretched into late morning, and the coffee pot grew cold, something in him began to twist. He wandered the house aimlessly. The laundry basket was overflowing, the dishwasher beeped for attention, and the kids, Lucas and Emma, were still asleep. He stared at the mess like it was written in a language he couldn't read. Okay, he muttered, rubbing his temples. I can handle this. He decided to make breakfast. How hard could it be? He cracked eggs into a pan, turned the heat too high, and walked away to look for bread. By the time he returned, the eggs had turned rubbery, the edges blackened. The smell of burnt oil filled the kitchen. Dad. Emma's voice came from upstairs. Is something burning? No. He shouted back, coughing as he waved the smoke away with a towel. It's fine. It wasn't fine. The toast burned next. Then the coffee overflowed because he forgot to switch out the filter. The kitchen looked like a war zone within 15 minutes, a greasy, smoky disaster that mirrored the state of his mind. By the time Lucas came down, rubbing his eyes, David had already opened all the windows. The November air rushed in, cold and sharp. What's for breakfast? Lucas asked. David gestured helplessly toward the blackened pan. Scrambled charcoal? Lucas frowned. Mom usually makes pancakes. Something in David's chest clenched. Well, Mom's not here right now. Yeah, Lucas muttered. We noticed. Emma appeared next, her long hair a tangled mess. Dad, I don't have any clean clothes. I have soccer practice later. David blinked. Didn't your mom? He stopped mid-sentence. Right. She usually did the laundry. He opened the washing machine. It was full of wet clothes that had clearly been sitting for days. The smell hit him like a slap. He closed it quickly, muttering a curse. By noon, the house had begun to unravel. Lucas couldn't find his soccer jersey. Emma burned microwave popcorn and started crying. The cat vomited on the carpet. David tried to clean, but everywhere he turned, there was something else to do: dishes, laundry, groceries, bills. For the first time in 2 years, he had no one to hand it off to. He sat down at the kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly. There was an unopened pile of mail in front of him: utility bills, credit card statements, a letter from the school. He opened one absent-mindedly and stared at the numbers. Due immediately. He swallowed hard. He'd known Tana was handling everything, but he hadn't known. Not like this. Not in the way that made your chest ache and your throat tighten because suddenly you realized just how much one person had been carrying. And how little you'd helped. When the kids started arguing in the living room, his temper cracked. Enough. He snapped. Can you just stop for 5 minutes? Both children froze. They'd never seen their father like that. Lucas glared. You're the one who's always sitting around. Mom does everything. The words hit like a punch to the gut. David stared at his son, speechless. It wasn't defiance in the boy's voice. It was disappointment, the kind of disappointment that no father wants to see reflected in his child's eyes. He turned away, pressing a hand to his forehead. Just go to your rooms, he muttered weakly. The sound of their footsteps faded upstairs, leaving him alone with the mess outside. The rain had picked up again, the soft kind that didn't cleanse, just soaked everything deeper. He sat there for a long time, staring at the cold frying pan, the sink full of dishes, the small, damp note still sitting on the counter. I have things to do. He read it again and again. The words felt heavier now. They weren't casual, they were deliberate. He remembered all the times she'd said, I'm fine, after coming home late. Her shoulders slumped, hands cracked from washing dishes. Still smiling like it didn't hurt. All the nights he'd watched her fold laundry while he sat scrolling on his phone, telling himself he was still looking for opportunities. Guilt crept up his spine like ice water. It wasn't that Tana had left him, it was that she'd finally left his version of her. By mid-afternoon, he tried again. He washed dishes, managed to cook pasta without burning it, even folded some laundry. It wasn't much, but it was something. The house still looked chaotic, but for the first time, he felt the weight of effort, the quiet, relentless grind that Tana had lived in every single day. When evening came, Lucas came downstairs quietly. "Dad," he said, his voice smaller now, "can we order pizza?" David exhaled a shaky laugh. "Yeah, buddy. Pizza sounds great." They ate in silence. Emma barely spoke. When she finished, she went to bed early, leaving her father and brother alone at the table. David glanced around the messy kitchen, crumbs everywhere, half-empty plates, sauce splattered on the counter. He'd only survived one day, and she'd done this for years. The realization hit so hard it made his throat close. When the headlights finally swept across the window hours later, David stood up instinctively. The door opened, and there she was, her hair damp from the rain, her coat still buttoned. She looked calm, not angry. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The silence stretched, not cold, but heavy. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know it was this hard." Tana's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "I know. I messed up everything today," he admitted. "The food, the laundry, the kids. I don't know how you do it." She stepped inside, setting down her bag. "I don't, David," she said simply. "I just keep trying. Every single day." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not just his wife, but the storm she'd been holding back for years. The exhaustion, the strength, the grace, and for the first time, he didn't see her as the person who made his life easier. He saw her as the reason it hadn't fallen apart sooner. When she walked past him toward the stairs, he whispered, "Tana. Thank you." She paused, her hand on the railing, then turned her head slightly. "Don't thank me," she said softly. "Start helping me." Then she went upstairs, leaving him alone with the sound of dripping rain, and the realization that maybe the house hadn't fallen apart today. Maybe it had just finally reflected the truth of what they'd both built. The next morning, the house was quiet, too quiet. That eerie kind of silence that sits heavy after a storm. David had barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table in the same clothes from last night, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. The house was still a mess, but now it was a different kind of mess, the kind that carried guilt in every corner. When Tana came downstairs, she looked rested, composed. She didn't slam doors or sigh or say, "I told you so." She just poured herself some coffee, sat across from him, and waited. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, David broke the silence. "I didn't mean for things to get like this." Her voice was calm. "Like what?" He gestured vaguely around them, the cluttered kitchen, the bills, the exhaustion hanging between them. "Like this. Me, useless. You doing everything. I thought I was helping by staying out of the way." Tana gave a small, bitter laugh. "David, staying out of the way isn't the same as helping." He flinched. "I just thought," he began, but she raised a hand. "No," she interrupted softly. "You didn't think. That's the problem. You stopped thinking the day you lost your job. You stopped showing up, not just for me, but for this whole family." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was exhausted. Like she had rehearsed this speech in her mind for months but never had the strength to say it out loud until now. David looked down, his fingers tightening around the coffee mug. "I was scared, Tana. I didn't know how to start over." She nodded slowly. "I know. I was scared too. But I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Someone had to keep us standing." That one sentence cut deeper than anything else. He finally looked up, meeting her eyes. For the first time, there was no trace of anger in them, only clarity. "I'm not trying to punish you," she continued quietly. "But something has to change. I can't keep living like this, working, cleaning, carrying everything while you wait for your pride to heal." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling just slightly. "I love you, David. I really do. But I love my sanity more." He stared at her, confused and frightened. "What are you saying?" Tana leaned forward, her voice steady now. "You have 1 month. 30 days. Either you find work, any work, and start showing up again, or I'm leaving." David blinked, stunned. "Leaving? You mean, just like that?" "Not just like that," she said firmly. "It's been 2 years of me pretending we're okay. This isn't sudden, David. It's overdue." He ran a hand through his hair, his breath shaky. "I'll change, Tana. I swear, I'll change. I just need." "You've had time," she said, cutting him off. "I'm giving you a deadline, not another excuse." Her words hung in the air like a final verdict. The sound of rain tapping on the window filled the silence. David looked away, tears threatening but refusing to fall. He felt smaller than he ever had before, smaller than his own son's disappointed eyes, smaller than the man he used to be. "Do the kids know?" he asked quietly. Tana shook her head. "Not yet. But they can feel it. Everyone can feel it." She stood, gathering the dishes from the table. The simple act of cleaning up, after such a heavy conversation, made him ache inside. "Let me," he said quickly, reaching out. She stopped mid-motion, then handed him the plate without a word. It was a small gesture, but it carried meaning. He washed the dishes clumsily, the hot water stinging his hands. Behind him, Tana began to wipe down the counter. They worked in silence, side by side, two people who had forgotten what teamwork looked like. When he finished, he turned to her, his voice trembling. "What if I can't find a job?" She didn't soften. "Then I'll go. And I'll be okay." That terrified him more than anything. Not her anger, not her disappointment, but her calm certainty that she could survive without him. "Please don't do this," he whispered. "I'm not doing anything to you," she said quietly. "I'm doing something for me." He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I never meant to make you feel alone." Tana stared at him for a long time. Then she said, almost gently, "You didn't make me feel alone, David. You left me alone. There's a difference." That broke him. The tears finally came, silent and unsteady, but Tana didn't move to comfort him. She just stood there, arms crossed, steady and sure, the same way she'd stood for their entire marriage. Only this time, she wasn't holding everything up for him. She was holding herself up. When she finally spoke again, her tone softened. "I want us to work, David. But that means you have to work, too. Not just at a job, at being a partner, a father. A man who doesn't hide behind fear." He nodded slowly. The weight of her words settling in like cold rain, she walked over to the refrigerator and taped something on the door, a single sheet of paper with a few lines scribbled across it. He couldn't see what it said yet. When she left the room, he approached it hesitantly. At the top, in her neat handwriting, it read, 30 days. Show up. Try. Change. And beneath that, one final line, "I won't remind you twice." He stood there staring at it for what felt like forever. The quiet hum of the fridge the only sound in the kitchen. For the first time in years, David didn't feel angry or defensive. He just felt responsible. When he finally looked up toward the stairs, where Tana had disappeared, he whispered into the empty air, "I'll earn you back, Tana. I promise." But this time, he knew, promises alone wouldn't save him. The days that followed felt strange. Tana didn't nag. She didn't remind or scold. She simply stopped carrying everything. For the first time in years, she woke up without rushing to pack lunches or check bills before work. She left early, walked to the bus stop in the crisp February air, and watched the sunrise spill over Scranton's quiet streets. The world seemed calmer, or maybe she finally was. At home, David was learning. Slowly, awkwardly, but earnestly. The first week, he burned breakfast twice and forgot to pick up Lucas from soccer practice. But by the second week, things started to shift. He woke up earlier, shaved, made lists, applied for jobs, any jobs. He fixed the broken cabinet in the kitchen, mowed the lawn, cooked simple dinners. When he landed a part-time position at a local construction supply store, he came home holding the offer letter like it was a trophy. Tana smiled, polite but distant. "That's good, David." It wasn't the praise he expected, but it was honest, and for once, he didn't need her approval. He wanted her respect. He started coming home tired but fulfilled, covered in dust. Hands rough again, the kind of exhaustion that came from doing something, not from sulking on the couch. Meanwhile, Tana's world opened up. Her boss promoted her to senior project coordinator after seeing how she'd managed 2 major clients flawlessly. On weekends, she took long walks by Lake Scranton, sometimes with Emma, sometimes alone. She reconnected with her old book club, laughed again, bought herself a yellow scarf just because she liked it. She felt visible. At home, the atmosphere had shifted. Dinner wasn't perfect, but it was shared. Emma helped set the table, Lucas took out the trash, and David, for once, asked, "How was your day?" And actually listened. One evening, after everyone went to bed, Tana sat alone in the living room with a cup of tea. She looked at the small note still taped to the fridge, 30 days. Show up. Try. Change. And smiled faintly. He had, not perfectly, not dramatically, but steadily, that weekend. David asked if she wanted to take a walk together. They strolled down Maple Avenue, talking about small things, the neighbors, the kids, the weather. The silence between them wasn't tense anymore. It was soft. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about what you said that morning." Tana didn't answer, just waited. "You said you loved your sanity more," he continued. "I get it now. You were never asking me to be perfect. You were asking me to show up." She smiled faintly. "It took you a while." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah. I guess I had to lose the easy version of you to find the real one." They stopped near the small bakery where they used to go when they first married. The smell of fresh bread filled the cold air. David hesitated, then said, "Can we start over, Tana? Not erase, just rebuild." Tana looked at him for a long moment. His eyes weren't defensive or pleading this time. They were tired but sincere, maybe, she said softly. But only if we both keep building. That was enough for him. The following weeks passed quietly. Without grand gestures or confessions, just consistency. Tana noticed the difference in small things, the way David folded laundry without being asked. How he thanked her for dinner. How he listened when Lucas talked about school or Emma showed him her drawings. How he didn't shrink away from hard conversations anymore. There were still bad days, days when stress made her snap. Or when he doubted himself, but they handled them differently now. Together. One night, after finishing paperwork in her home office, Tana found David asleep on the couch with Emma curled up beside him. A children's movie still playing on the TV. The soft blue glow lit their faces. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel resentment or fatigue. Just peace. She turned off the lights, tucked a blanket over them, and whispered to herself, "This is what showing up looks like." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains. The fridge door still held her old note, but next to it was something new, a smaller piece of paper in David's handwriting. It read, "Thank you for not giving up on me. I'm still trying. Every day." She stared at it for a long time, then smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Later that night, while folding laundry, Emma came in and asked, "Mom, why do you still keep that old note? The one that says I have things to do?" Tana paused, smoothing out a towel. "Because it reminds me of the day I stopped being invisible," she said. "The day I realized I don't have to wait for anyone to give me permission to live my life." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "So, it's not about Dad?" Tana smiled. "No, honey. It's about me." When everyone was asleep, she went to her nightstand and pulled out the same yellow post-it note she'd written months ago, the one that started everything, "I have things to do. I'll be back tonight." She looked at it one last time before placing it gently inside a small glass frame. Not as a memory of leaving, but as a reminder of returning to herself. As she turned off the lamp, she whispered softly into the dark, "Life's too short to keep carrying what others refuse to lift. I'm done being invisible." Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the promise of spring, and for the first time in years, Tana slept deeply, not because the world was perfect, but because she was finally living in it on her own terms.